Imagine you're sitting in seat 14A, looking out at the clouds, unaware that inside the cockpit of your brand new Boeing 737 MAX, a silent war is being fought. The nose of the plane is plunging toward the earth. The pilots are pulling back on their controls with everything they have, but the plane is fighting them. It's not a mechanical failure in the traditional sense. There are no engines flaming out, no wings snapping. Instead, a hidden piece of software, triggered by a single faulty sensor, has decided that this plane must dive. The pilots don't even know the software exists, because Boeing decided they didn't need to be told. This is the moment the world realized that something fundamental had broken at the heart of the world's most important aviation company. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the final, inevitable result of a decades-long shift, where the sound of a rising stock price became louder than the roar of a perfectly tuned engine. For nearly a century, Boeing was the gold standard of American excellence, a company where engineers were kings and safety was a religion. But something changed. The death of engineering didn't happen in a hangar. It happened in boardrooms, where spreadsheets replaced blueprints, and the pursuit of shareholder value became a terminal illness. To understand how Boeing fell, you have to understand what it once was. In the mid-20th century, Boeing was an engineering firm that happened to make money, not a finance firm that happened to make planes. When they built the 747, they bet the entire company on its success. It was a massive technical risk, driven by a passion for the impossible. Engineers at Boeing could walk into a manager's office and shut down a production line if they saw a bolt out of place, and they would be rewarded for it. But the turning point came in 1997 with a merger that would haunt the company forever. When Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, it was described by many insiders as the day McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing with Boeing's own money. More importantly, it was a cultural coup. The leaders who took over weren't the ones who grew up designing wings. They were the ones who grew up reading balance sheets. They moved the corporate headquarters from Seattle, where the planes were built, to Chicago, nearly 2,000 miles away. It was a symbolic divorce. Leadership no longer wanted to hear the noise of the factory floor. They wanted to see the numbers move on Wall Street. The result was a slow, agonizing erosion of the company's soul. Money that used to go into research and development was redirected into massive stock buybacks. Between 2013 and 2019, Boeing spent more than $40 billion buying back its own shares to inflate the stock price, even as its product line was aging and competition was heating up. Across the ocean, Airbus was gaining ground. When Airbus announced the A320neo, a fuel-efficient jet that threatened Boeing's dominance, the executives in Chicago panicked. They didn't have the time or the budget to design a new plane from scratch, because they had spent their cash on keeping investors happy. So they decided to put new, larger, more efficient engines on the 50-year-old airframe of the 737. But there was a problem. The 737 sat too low to the ground. The new engines wouldn't fit under the wings. Their solution was to move the engines further forward and higher up. This changed the aerodynamics of the plane, making it prone to pitching its nose up into a dangerous stall. Rather than redesigning the airframe, Boeing's engineers, under immense pressure to keep costs down and schedules tight, developed a software fix called MCAS. It was designed to automatically push the nose down if it sensed a stall, to avoid the need for expensive pilot retraining in simulators, which would have cost millions. Boeing downplayed the system to regulators and kept it out of the pilot manuals. They essentially created a plane that relied on a secret ghost in the machine to stay level. They gambled that a single sensor would never fail. They lost that gamble twice. In Indonesia and Ethiopia, 346 people paid for that corporate shortcut with their lives. The crashes of the Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines flights weren't just technical glitches. They were the physical manifestation of a moral failure. The company had traded its engineering integrity for a competitive edge that turned out to be an illusion. even after the MAX was grounded and the world began to look closer, the rot seemed deeper than anyone imagined. Whistleblowers began to emerge from the shadows of the 787 Dreamliner factories in South Carolina, describing a culture of fear, where employees were pressured to ignore defects to meet production targets. They spoke of debris being left inside plane wings, of wiring clusters that were installed incorrectly, and of a management style that treated safety concerns as a nuisance. The message from the top was clear: meet the schedule, keep the stock moving, and don't ask questions. This is the dark side of modern corporatism, where the metrics for success are completely detached from the quality of the product. When you're building a smartphone, a bug means a crashed app. When you're building a jet, a bug means a hole in the ground. Boeing's leadership seemed to have forgotten the difference. The crisis didn't end with the MAX. In early 2024, the world watched in horror as a door plug blew off a 737 MAX 9 in mid-flight. It was a miracle that no one was sitting in the adjacent seat. The subsequent investigation revealed that the bolts meant to hold the door in place were simply missing. It was a staggering lapse in basic manufacturing discipline. It showed that the death of engineering wasn't just about high-level software decisions. It was about the fundamental breakdown of the assembly line itself. The company had outsourced so much of its manufacturing to subcontractors to save money that it had lost control over the quality of its own planes. Spirit AeroSystems, the company that built the fuselage, was itself a former Boeing division that had been spun off to cut costs. The drive for efficiency had created a supply chain where no one was truly accountable for the final bolt. As the lawsuits piled up and the CEO was eventually forced to step down, the financial betrayal became even more apparent. While families were grieving and the company's reputation was in tatters, the executives who presided over this decline walked away with tens of millions of dollars in compensation. The system worked exactly as it was designed for the people at the top, even as it failed the people in the sky. This is the tragedy of the Boeing story. It is a warning to every industry that relies on technical expertise. When you stop being an engineering company and start being a financial instrument, you lose the very thing that made you valuable in the first place. Trust is the most expensive thing an airline has, and it's the one thing you can't buy back on the open market. Today, Boeing faces a long and uncertain road to recovery. They are being forced to slow down, to bring their headquarters back to the engineers, and to undergo the most intense regulatory scrutiny in history. But the question remains, can you ever really restore a culture of safety once it has been sacrificed at the altar of the quarterly earnings report? The planes may eventually be fixed, the bolts may be tightened, and the software may be patched. But the death of engineering is a warning that remains. It tells us that when a company forgets its primary purpose, when it values the price of the stock over the life of the passenger, it doesn't just lose its way. It loses its right to lead. The Boeing safety crisis is more than a story about aviation. It is a story about the danger of a world where the people who build things are no longer the ones who run things. As we look at the wreckage of Boeing's reputation, we are forced to ask, how many other pillars of our modern world are secretly being hollowed out by the same pursuit of short-term profit? We rely on these giants to be infallible, but they are only as strong as the integrity of the people in charge. For Boeing, the cost of the lesson was 346 lives and a legacy that may never fly as high as it once did. The sky used to be a place of pure wonder and safety, but now, every time a passenger feels a bit of turbulence or sees that familiar logo on the wing, a small part of them wonders if the people who built this plane were thinking about the flight or the stock price. And that doubt is the most damning indictment of all. It is the legacy of a company that traded its wings for a spreadsheet, proving that in the end, you can't manage your way out of a crash if you've already sold your soul for a higher closing bell.